Good afternoon and welcome to the Festival of Arts and Ideas. The International Festival of Arts and Ideas is created and produced on the traditional lands of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Pagusset, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac in the land we all call home, Connecticut. We hope that from wherever you are, you take a moment to acknowledge and honor the Native people whose lands you're on and the history of the place you're in. The International Festival of Arts and Ideas stands with Black Lives Matter and with countless citizens in our own city and across the country who are exercising their right to protest the systemic racism at the root of police violence. The festival stands in solidarity with Black and Brown communities who are targeted and abused by unjust systems of oppression. Welcome to Speaking Your Truth and the 25th year of the festival. I'm Denise Santisteban. I'll be your host. If you have comments, please put them in the chat and I'll make sure that Matt gets them. Check out artidea.org and you'll see that we are celebrating the festival this year virtually with ideas programs which look at democracy, food events, bike and walking tours, and artistic experiences. Storytelling for change. This is a workshop for people with little or no experience in storytelling. However, I can tell you that even people who have told on stage can learn something from Matt. Stories are for everyone, personal and professional. And now about Matt Dix, who's an international best-selling author of a rock opera and musicals, columnist, storyteller, teacher, 42-time Moth StorySLAM champion, 6-time GrandSLAM champion, founder of Speak Up, and Lord of Sealand. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Thank you, Denise. I appreciate you throwing in the Lord of Sealand. For those of you who are curious, it has nothing to do with storytelling. I guess it does. You know, Sealand is a platform, and a military platform off the coast of England it was used during World War II, and they were abandoned after World War II. And sometime in the 1960s, someone went and sort of commandeered one of the platforms and declared their own country. And it's actually a country that is recognized, I think, at the moment by 2 other countries in the world. And so they declared themselves Sealand. And one of the ways they fund themselves is they offer lordships and ladyships and baronies. And you have to pay somewhere between $50 to $200 to become a Lord of Sealand and get a lot of paperwork and a certificate that you can put in your classroom and lord over your 5th graders. My wife was very upset when she found out I spent $50 on my Lord of Sealand status, but I'll tell you, it ends up in my bio all the time. And when I step off a stage, people will often come to me and say, "What is this Lord of Sealand?" And it's an opportunity to begin a conversation and to tell a story. It's also an outstanding Father's Day gift. I was looking at the lists of possible Father's Day gifts on all these websites, thinking about what I should ask for, and I want nothing. But if I didn't have a Lord of Sealand membership or status symbol, that's what I would want. So if you have a father in your life who you can't really figure out what to get him, make him a lord or a baron or a Earl of Sealand and get the whole kit, and they will be very excited. That has nothing to do really with storytelling, but thank you for including it, Denise. Hello, everyone. My name, as you heard, is Matthew Dix. I'm a storyteller and a writer and many other things. I wish we could be together today. That would be the best way to do this. I have been teaching my 5th grade students for the last 13 weeks this way. I've been conducting lots of storytelling workshops this way. I've actually been performing all over the world via remote in ways I never thought I could. I've done shows in Costa Rica and Australia and England and Tanzania, places that know of me, but I could never travel to them and perform. But now because of COVID, we are all living on the internet, and as a result, I'm able to perform for audiences that I have not ever seen and probably will never see. Ideally, I would like to be with you today. I'm in Newington, Connecticut. I'm 45 minutes from New Haven. The goal was to be standing in front of you and speaking, which is always the better way to do this, but we're gonna do it this way, and it's working out. It is not my favorite way to teach. It's not my favorite way to tell a story, but it does seem to be working, and it is expanding the opportunities for people. I've worked with people all over the world just in the last 12 weeks, people who I would have never met. So perhaps you're one of those people. Maybe you are not in Connecticut. Maybe you're somewhere around the world, and if you're with us, I'm really excited to have you. we're gonna do a workshop that's gonna run a couple hours. I'm gonna create a couple landing spots in the workshop, sort of little breaks where you can get up and move about and think about things. That'll be a time for me to answer questions. They won't be directly related to the instruction. So if you have a question as I'm talking, just fire it away. Denise is going to be collecting them, and if I get a bunch of questions because I'm unclear about something, she's going to jump right in and sort of bring me to a halt and make sure that I'm being clear enough, because there are times when I say something and it's wrong or it's not clear enough and people don't understand what I'm saying. So feel free to jump in at any time and put a question in the chat. We will have a couple spots where I'll land and sort of ask Denise for any of those questions at those moments. At the end of this workshop, probably an hour and a half from now-ish, when I bring it to an end, I'm going to leave about 15 minutes to handle all the remaining questions that we have. And at that point, you can fire off as many questions as you would like. And I can give you some information on how to pursue storytelling. If this is something you've never done before, I have lots of resources that you can begin to explore to become a better storyteller. My goal today is twofold. The first sort of half of our workshop is going to be finding stories to tell from your everyday life. I do believe it's the most important part of the workshop, oddly. I always say that I'd rather hear the right story told poorly than the wrong story told well. And I often think in the world today, we are hearing the wrong story. People are not telling the stories that others really want to hear. There's also a lot of people in the world, and perhaps you, who are thinking, I don't have any stories to tell. And that's just simply not true. I've never met a human being in my life who I can't find 100 stories to tell from their life if we spend enough time together. So I'm going to give you some strategies today on finding the stories that you need to tell. I think the best storytellers in the world are the people who have the most stories to tell. So if you just stay with me for the first half of the workshop, the first, let's say, hour, but it'll be less than an hour. That is going to be the most important hour to find those stories. And then our second goal is to craft stories, to put them together, to make the content that you find in your everyday life meaningful, entertaining, connective, moving, all of the things that we want our stories to be. I wrote a whole book on the subject. The title of the book is Storyworthy. I'm writing a second book right now because I couldn't fit everything into the first. So I can speak endlessly about strategies, very particular, specific strategies that can be used to improve your stories. I've sort of become a storytelling nerd in that regard, whether I'm reading a book, watching a movie, writing my own novels, listening to my wife tell me a story. I am constantly dissecting and looking for things that people are doing right, things that are people doing wrong. I don't tell my wife when she's doing something wrong because I value my marriage, but she does a lot wrong. So I listen and I steal ideas all the time from people, and I have a wealth of strategies. Today, my goal is to give you three big ones, the three that will transform you to the greatest degree. Let's say the 75% of the things that I teach, 75% of my content I'm going to offer you today. It'll make you a 75% better storyteller by the end if you use these strategies. And then the other 25%, those are little bits at a time over practice. And you're welcome. I can give you opportunities to take workshops with me in the future. But those are the two goals today, to find stories and then to get three great strategies to begin telling stories better. Maybe I'll work a couple more strategies in if I have time. And I'm going to tell you a couple stories along the way. I'll use those stories as models for what I'm going to be teaching. But why don't we talk first about finding stories from your life, finding stories in your everyday life. I haven't been telling stories for very long, which is good news for you. Oftentimes we meet people who can do something well and we think they've put in their 5,000 hours, they've done it for 20 years. I started storytelling in 2011, which means I haven't even reached a decade of storytelling. Back in July of 2011, I took the stage for the first time in New York City. It was at a Moth StorySLAM. If you're not familiar with the Moth, you probably are, given the fact that you're at this festival. But it's the granddaddy of all storytelling organizations. It's been around since 1997. It has shows in 26 cities around the country and 3 countries around the world. They are dedicated to the art and craft of storytelling. They run a whole bunch of shows and different types of shows. And the show that I went to was a competition. It was a story slam in New York City at the New Eurekans Poets Cafe. I went there because my friends told me I would be a good storyteller. They heard The Moth on the podcast that they produced. They heard it on the radio hour eventually. And they said, Matt, you have to go to New York and tell a story. You're going to be a great storyteller. And the reason they thought I was going to be a storyteller is not because I was a novelist at that point. I had published 2 novels up at that point in my life. They thought I'd be a great storyteller because they said, "You've had the worst life of anyone who we know," which is not a nice thing to say to your friend. And it's also not true. I have a wonderful life. I've got two great kids who will invariably, at some point during this workshop, interrupt me in an inappropriate way. I've got a fantastic wife. I've got a great life. I've got all the things I've ever wanted. But I've had a life that was bumpy for a long period of time. One of these lives that sort of have a lot of nonsense included. So, for example, twice in my life, my heart has stopped beating and I have stopped breathing. And I've required paramedics to restore my life with CPR. So I've died twice and come back to life. I was once arrested and tried for a crime I did not commit. I spent time in jail. I was actually put on trial. I was homeless for a period in my life. I was kicked out of my home after graduation and sent to live on my own to find my way. I was the victim of a horrific robbery. And that's honestly the tip of the iceberg of nonsense that has been my life. And my friends were all aware of these things. So they said, "Matt, go to New York and tell the story about the time when I was a kid and our house was on fire and I was plucked from my bed by a firefighter," which is another thing that has happened to me. So they said, "Go to New York. They're going to love those stories." And that's what I thought. I genuinely thought, I have good stories to tell. Therefore, I will be a good storyteller. I have discovered that that is nonsense. But I did go to New York that night. I told a story on the stage. Dan Kennedy, if you're familiar with him, he's the host of the Moth podcast often. He was the host that night. Uh, I honestly didn't want to tell a story that night. I sort of went kicking and screaming when I got there. The way these story slams work, there's a hat, which is really a tote bag. You drop your name in the tote bag. They pull out 10 names over the course of the night. 10 storytellers tell a story. There were about 20 names in the tote bag that night. So when I dropped my name in, I prayed, just don't pick me. I can go home. I can tell my friends I tried. Now leave me alone. I could move on with my life. And we got through 9 names before my name was chosen. And I was already mentally on I-95 heading home when I heard my name picked 10th. And I couldn't believe it. And at first I didn't move because it occurred to me that no one in this room actually knows who I am. No one in this theater has ever met me before. So if I just sit very still and very quiet, they will eventually pick another name. And that might have happened. Genuinely, I might have not moved, but my wife was with me that night, my terrible wife. And she kicked me under the table and she said, "That's your name." And I said, "I know." And she said, "You need to get up there and tell your story." And I said, "I don't want to." And she kicked me again and said, "Get up there." And so I got up onto the stage, didn't want to do it, took the mic, and as soon as I began speaking, I knew I had found something that I loved. The moment I began speaking, I felt at home. And a lot of the reasons that I was successful, I won that slam that night, and I've gone on to win more slams than anyone in history. A lot of it had to do with my background. I used to think I stumbled upon something that I was naturally good at, but it turns out my wife pointed it out to me much later on. "Well, you're a novelist. You've been working with stories all your life. I've been writing stories all my life. I've been a wedding DJ now for 23 years. So standing in front of a large group of people who I've never met before and speaking to them is something that it comes very easily to me. I've been an elementary school teacher for 22 years. That's the worst audience you could ever have in your entire life. And so the way I hold my students' attention is through story. It's just what I've always done. Even when I was a kid, when I was, 17, 18, 19, and I'd be at a party and I wanted to get a girl's attention, I knew I wasn't going to get their attention by the way I looked. Like Lenny Smith was at every party and he was a beautiful, beautiful man. Like I am as heterosexual as they come. And yet I would look at Lenny and think, I'm kind of attracted to him too. I get it. So I knew I couldn't beat Lenny on looks, but what I discovered was I could just tell stories. I often told stories about my own stupidity. And I discovered that when I shared my own stupidity with other people, they were drawn to me. And that's how I managed to sort of get dates early on. And it's all fallen in from there. But the important thing, the reason I tell you all that, is because my friends were wrong. It turns out that I have not been successful as a storyteller because of the things that have happened to me in my life, those crazy things. In fact, I haven't even told some of those stories yet. The story of my trial, I was actually put on trial in a courtroom, and I was tried for grand larceny. I've never told that story. My friends can't believe it. How do you not tell the story of the trial? If I had lost the trial, I would not have become a teacher. I would have been guilty of a felony. I probably would have gone to prison for a certain period of time. How do you not tell that story? It's simple. Those are really hard stories to tell. They're not hard to tell in that crafting them is any more difficult than any other story. They're hard to tell because ultimately, when I tell a story, what I want to do is connect with other human beings. I want them to feel closer to me. I want my stories to be relatable. I want people to hear them and sort of hear something from their own life, a bell in their own mind ringing at the same time. If I tell you the story of my trial, or I tell you the story of the time I died and came back to life, we are not going to connect on a going on trial or coming back from the dead level, because it's likely you haven't experienced that. It's a harder story to tell. You can tell it, and I'll teach you how to do it today, but it is a much harder story to tell. What I have fallen in love with, what I want you to fall in love with, is the small stories, the simple stories. When I am asked to tell a story from producers all over the country and all over the world, people are familiar with my stories. You go to my YouTube channel, you can see many of the stories that I've told. I think I've told 114 different stories now on stages around the world. And out of those 114 stories, which include both of the coming back to life stories and the interrogations and jailed and homeless, all of those stories are in that collection. The story that I get requested the most is a story that happened at the table I'm sitting at right now. At the end of this table here, we have dinner every night, my family and I, my wife, my two kids, Clara and Charlie, and myself. We sit at the end of the table and we have dinner. And the story that people request so often, it happened just a few years ago. At the time, Clara, my daughter, was about 5 and Charlie was 2. We were eating dinner one night right at this table. I've never actually talked about it at the table I was sitting at. So thank you, COVID. Um, so I was sitting at this table, and on this given night, my son is throwing food on the floor. It's chicken nuggets. Charlie, he doesn't eat. Even to this day, he doesn't really eat. He's in the first percentile for height and weight because he has no interest in food whatsoever. I don't understand it. And so on this given night, he's throwing chicken nuggets onto the floor. And I had a dog at the time who was utterly uninterested in table scraps. So chicken nuggets would land by her head. She wouldn't do anything about them. And I was kind of losing my mind. My daughter, she was fine. She's like me. She's perfect. But Charlie was miserable. So I asked my wife, Alicia, across the table, I said, what are we going to do about Charlie and the food? And she said, well, I have a pediatrician appointment tomorrow anyway, so I'll just ask the doctor for advice. And I love that answer. I love handing my problems over to experts. And so the next night, we're right back at this table. On that night, it's peas. I will never forget it. Charlie's got peas and he's throwing them everywhere. They're all over my kitchen floor over here. He spreads them out. He's like a professional food thrower. He can get them everywhere. And again, I'm losing my mind. And so I ask I ask Alicia, I say, what did the doctor say? What are we going to do about this kid and the food that he's throwing? And Alicia puts her fork down and she takes a deep breath. And I remember I sort of grab the table and I take a deep breath because I feel like something's coming. And it is. I'm right. She tells me that the doctor said that when Charlie throws food like he's doing on this night, we have to take all the food away and not give it back to him for the rest of the meal. And then she says to me, I know that's going to be really hard for you, Matt. And I'm surprised she says that because I'm an elementary school teacher. I am a professional punisher of children. I'm really good at it. I have no problem punishing my students and my own children. I believe in consequences. So I ask Alicia, why do you say that's going to be hard for me? And Alicia says to me, Matt, I know that when you were young, you were hungry all the time. And that was true too. When I was a kid, I grew up hungry. I grew up in a family that didn't have enough money to always feed itself. And so I grew up on government cheese and Wonder Bread and oftentimes an empty stomach. But I had never told Alicia about that. I had never told anyone about it. It turns out that when you're hungry as a kid, for whatever reason, you feel like it's your fault. It becomes shame that you live with every day when you don't have enough food. So much so that as a kid, and even now as an adult, when someone offers me food, I often say no. Because as a kid, I learned that you can't take food from other people because you can never reciprocate. I will never have extra food to give back to someone. And I had kept that secret all my life. As a kid, I was hungry and I told no one. And I grew up and I just kept it buried. But at that point, my wife had been with me for more than 10 years. She had heard me tell my stories. She had figured me out. She had done that thing that the people who love you the most do. They see through you. And so she told me, I know you were hungry when you were a kid. Then she tells me that every morning when I get Clara's lunchbox ready for kindergarten, I put more food into the lunchbox than a kid could ever eat on a given day. And she waits for me to leave for work. And then she would come down the stairs and she would empty out the lunchbox. And she had never wanted to tell me that because she knew how important it was for me to send my daughter off to school every day with more than enough food to eat. And so I was sitting at this table, looking across at my wife in that chair. And I remember thinking that I've married the perfect woman. Like she knows my heart better than I know my own heart. That is the story that is most requested when producers from around the world email or call and ask me to tell a story. Now, I didn't tell you the story there. I sort of summarized quite a bit of it. If I told you the full version of it, you'd hear about my childhood, you'd laugh, you'd cry, you'd do a lot of things. It's about 8 or 9 minutes long, that story, and it's in its full length. But that's what people want, and it makes sense to me. They ask for that story instead of the time I died, or the other time I died, or the time I was in jail, or the time the firefighters pulled me out of bed. They ask for that story because that story can connect with so many people. Right? If I tell you the story about the time I'm plucked from the bed by the firefighters, that's not something that probably ever happened to you. But we all know what it's like to be hungry, if not for food, for something else. And if you're a parent, you know what it's like to want your children to have more than you ever had. And even if you're not a parent, I believe that everyone understands the weight of a secret that you can carry for a long time. Maybe you're like me. Maybe you're wishing that someone would say your secret out loud so you didn't have to say it first. We all carry sort of things inside us, oftentimes from our childhood, things we don't talk about. And then to have someone say it out loud was remarkable. And so you understand those things. And that's what producers of storytelling shows understand, that that story makes people laugh and cry because they can connect with it in a way that it is much harder to connect with some of those other big stories. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I want you to be looking for. I want you to look for a moment where someone says something to you, like my wife said that night, and it makes me feel different about myself. It makes me look at my world in a different way. A small, small moment, right? A tiny moment, really. My wife says something and everything changes. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I want you to find. Those are the best stories to tell, the small stories. And so I'm going to give you a trick on how to find them. I'm going to give you a strategy. I'm going to give you homework. I call it homework for life. I've actually trademarked the phrase. It is a homework assignment that as an elementary school teacher I'm going to give you today. And if you are a good student and you value your storytelling, or even if you don't, even if you just value yourself, it's a homework assignment you'll do for the rest of your life. I began the homework assignment now 8 years ago. So 8 years ago, I had been on stage for 3 years, and I had been working through the list of stories that I had created when I first started Stories at the Moth, telling stories at the Moth. I created a list of all my possible stories. And as I was telling more and more stories, I was running out of items on that list. I didn't want to become one of those storytellers who had like 12 great stories, and every time they were on the stage, they rolled out one of those chestnuts. I know those people. I've seen those guys. I see them all the time. I'm standing in a theater, I'm sitting in a theater, and I go, oh, I've heard this one before, right? I never wanted to be that person. I wanted to be the person that every single time I took the stage, I had something new for my audience. And that's my goal all the time. If I'm in a new city, you're going to get a new story every time. I never tell the same story in the same city ever. And so that's who I wanted to be. And so because I think I'm an elementary school teacher, I gave myself homework. I gave it to myself first. Call it homework for life. Here's what I did. I decided that every night before I went to bed, I was going to reflect back on the day that I had just lived. And I was going to think about the moment in that day that was the most story worthy of all the moments I had. Even if that day contained no truly story worthy moments, even if there was nothing in that day that I'd ever take to a stage, I was going to find the moment that was the most story worthy, even if it wasn't. I was going to find the moment that if someone forced me on a stage and said, you will tell a story about something that happened today or the world will end, what would I tell? As boring, as benign as it might be, what would I tell? And then I wrote it down. Now, I don't write it down like as the story because that's crazy. You might be that person. You might be one of those rare journalers in the world who writes down massive amounts of text every single day. And if you are, congratulations. I don't believe in it. I think most journalers are wonderful journalers when people break up with them. When there's no love in their life, they're committed to their journal. And when a new love arrives, oftentimes the journal gets put away. I used to be that person. I've got piles of journals from all my life in the other room. And most of the journals I was writing when I didn't have a girlfriend. And so, what I want to do is create a habit in you. A habit as simple as brushing your teeth, a habit as simple as taking a shower, a habit as simple as putting on shoes every day. So, I want it to be short and repeatable. So, rather than writing the whole story down, what I use is an Excel spreadsheet. I take it and I turn it into two columns. The left hand column is the date, and the right hand column I stretch all the way across my screen. And just in that column, in the length of a computer screen, I write the story that I had that day. I capture just enough so I can remember it. My goal was do this every single day, and maybe once a month you'll find a story that you didn't realize had happened. 12 new stories a year. I thought that if I do that, that'd be amazing. Instead, something even more amazing happened. And it's not something that has only happened to me. I can tell you, I've written about this in my book. I talk about it on my podcast. I did a TED talk on the subject. It's out in the world, Homework for Life. And truly, without exaggeration, not a single day of my life goes by when someone does not email me and tell me, I've been doing Homework for Life for 100 days and it's changed my life. I've never received an email. Every single day, I get an email like that. I am sure right now, oh, I did. I got one already today. Through Facebook Messenger today, I received a Facebook message from someone in Oregon who had been doing Homework for Life for 100 days and wanted to let me know how much it had changed his life. Every day I get one of those messages. I've never received a message that says, I've been doing your Homework for Life for 100 days and it's terrible. Anyone who commits to it and does it discovers it changes their life. What happened to me and what will happen to you if you commit yourself to this is over the course of time, I discovered that our lives are filled with stories. Stories I never realized were happening around me. I developed a lens for storytelling. I see the world in a new way, and I'm not special in any way because thousands of people, no exaggeration, do Homework for Life with me, and they have developed that same lens. They see their life in a new way. The truth is, all the time, I'm not going to say every day because that would be an exaggeration, but many days of our lives, we have something worth telling about, something stage worthy worth telling about. A moment happens where someone says something to you and you suddenly feel a little different. A moment when you experience something and it makes you think about the world in a new way. A moment when you change your mind about something. A moment when you start the day feeling great, but by the end of the day you feel terrible and justifiably so. A moment when you do something incredibly stupid. A moment when you make a terrible mistake. All of these are story worthy moments. What happens to us, the way you live your life if you're not doing Homework for Life, the way I used to live my life, is if you are lucky, you occasionally see those moments. And then what happens is you might tell your spouse, you might tell a colleague, you might tell a friend, but within 3 months, that moment is gone. We throw away our memories like they are trash. We discard them and make no attempt to recover them. And if you don't believe me, play this game with me for a moment. I can't see you, so I don't know how old you are, but let us say whatever your age is, take your age and subtract 15 right now. So I am 48, minus 15 is 33, right? 33. So subtract 15 from your age. For me, it's 33. If I was to ask you, in my case, Matt, tell me 10 stories that happened during the 33rd year of your life when you were 33. Tell me 10 things that happened. I'd be hard pressed to tell you 10. I'd be very hard pressed to tell you 10. Unless I had a child born that year, unless I had a large move of some kind, I've probably thrown away my 33rd year. Most of the memories are gone. It doesn't mean I had a bad year. It doesn't mean I had a boring year. It just means I didn't do anything to hold on to the year. Homework for Life gives you the opportunity to develop a lens so you can begin to see more moments. And then it gives you the opportunity to capture the moments permanently so you don't throw them away. If you're a parent, especially if you're the parent of an older child, you know this is especially true. How many times in your life has your child said or done something? Let's say said something, and you have thought, That is hilarious. I can't believe my child just said that. I've got to write it down. And then you don't write it down. And then your kid is 18 years old and graduating this year, and you wonder where all the time went. You say it went by like it was the blink of an eye. I am here to tell you that since I've been doing homework for life, my life does not go by in the blink of an eye. Homework for life slows time down for you. It allows you to mark your days. It allows you to take note and make a record of the things that are meaningful. I can honestly tell you, a week goes by like a week, and a year goes by like a year. I don't lose things anymore. I don't miss them. I see them and I record them. Just on the other side of this room is my kitchen. I'm just thinking about this now. About 2 months ago, my son and Charlie and my wife were over there. Charlie now is 7, or he just turned 8, but back then he was 7. Charlie likes to propose to my wife. He's in love with her. He's deeply in love with her. Just the other night, he said, "Why don't we kiss like those people in the movies?" He goes, "This kind of kiss." And my wife had to explain why that kiss was not appropriate. So he loves her right now. He's going through that phase. And he proposes to her all the time. He says, "Mommy, will you marry me?" And Alicia, my wife, always says the same thing. She says, "I'm sorry, honey, I already married your dad." Every single time, that's what she says. So just a couple months ago, they are standing over there in the kitchen. I'm right here. I'm working on one of my novels. And I hear Charlie say, "Mommy, please marry me." And Alicia's holding him because remember, he's little. So he's 7, but he's tiny. So she's holding him. He's squeezing her cheeks and like he's squeezing them with love and saying, "Mommy, please marry me." And she says what she always says. She says, "Charlie, I'm sorry, I can't. I already married your daddy." And Charlie looks across the kitchen at me, sitting here in this seat, and then he points his fingers at me and goes, "Pew pew." Right? Edible complex. He's trying to kill his father so he can marry his mother. Unbelievable. Pew pew. Right? I tell my friends on the golf course that story, they all fall down laughing. They can't believe it. It's great, right? It's a hilarious thing that I've used in many stand-up shows, and if I have to give a speech, it's what I use right now because it's great. But here's the truth. A year from now, if I'm not doing homework for life, if I don't record it, it's gone. It's absolutely gone. As great and hilarious as it is, that is what we do with our memories. We toss them aside like they're trash. You'll walk down a street and pick up a quarter, thinking it's worth something, even though you don't know whose pocket it was just in. Right? It could be in the pocket of a mass murderer, and you pick it up, put it in your pocket. In the age of COVID, you pick it up and put it in your pocket. Right? But your child says something magnificent, and you don't take a moment to write it down. Right? Or your friend says something that moves you in a way you can't believe, or your mother says something to you that you've been waiting to hear for years, and you let it go. Dust in the wind. It's terrible. Homework for life will change all of that for you. And I tell people if you're not even going to tell a story, if your goal isn't to never tell a story, if you're a mute, a person who can't actually speak and you don't want to tell a story, you should still be doing homework for life. I give homework for life to people who just come and ask me for advice on how to live life better. They have no desire to ever tell a story, but it's a way to slow down time. It's a way to start to recognize the things that are important in your life, to hold on to them. The other thing that will happen if you start doing homework for life is you're going to crack open in a magical way that you can't believe. Memories that are buried inside you, experiences that you have long since discarded, will start to reappear. As you start to examine your life through this lens, that lens that you form will suddenly crack you open. And things will happen that you can't believe. You'll start to look at your life in a new and more interesting way. My favorite example is just a few years ago, we'll say maybe 3 years ago. It was November, but it was warm. It was warm here in New England in November. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear a scratching on my bed, and I open my eyes and look, and it's my dog, Kaylee. She's a little white Lhasa Apso, and she's looking at me. She gives me that look that if you own a dog, you understand they look at you and they can speak to you through the look. Her look is, "I have to pee." And this is weird because it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and Kaylee's one of those dogs that can usually get through the night. So I'm surprised. So I look back at her like, "Really?" And she gives me the look back, which essentially says, "Don't be a jerk. I have to pee." So I have a decision to make. I'm in bed. I'm wearing a pair of boxers, satin boxers covered in hearts, given to me by my mother-in-law, a fact which I try to forget all the time, but they're very good for sleeping. And that's all I've got on. I have to decide, do I need to get dressed to take my dog out to pee? I live on this road that you don't drive on unless you live on it. It's one of those roads. There's like 12 houses. Uh, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't have any neighbors who are up at 2 o'clock in the morning. We're all sort of adults here. Lots of us have little kids. Like we're asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's warm. So I decide I'll bring her out on the lawn. Kaylee pees quickly anyway. She's like, she's not someone who takes her time. She gets the job done quickly. So I decide we're just going to go out in my boxers. She'll pee on the front lawn. We'll bring her right back in. And we do. We go out on the front lawn. She pees right away. I turn to head back in, and then she pulls on the leash. And I look at her, and she gives me that look, another look that says, I'd like to walk to the end of the street. Now, it's not that far from where I'm sitting right here. Oddly, I can see the end of the street. So it's not that far away. It's 4 houses down. And it's odd that she wants to walk because she's old. Like, she doesn't like to walk so much anymore, especially at 2 in the morning. But she's pulling me, and I'm one of those guys that just can't say no to his dog. And so I look at myself. All I've got is boxers on, don't even have shoes on. And I think, well, I mean, it's right there. It'll be fine. And so we start walking down the street. It is a warm night. There's not a single star in the sky. It is dark. And the birds are loud. Like, the birds are always loud at 2 in the morning, but they're especially loud on this night. They're like cheering us on. I get to the end of the street, and I turn to head back, and she pulls again. She takes a right and pulls. She wants to go around the block. And I can't believe it. I can't remember the last time she wanted to go around the block. Now, this next street, which I can see from where I'm sitting right now, that street is Francis Avenue. I live on Francis Drive. When I get onto Francis Avenue, that street's going to be fine. Nobody's going to be on that street either. That is a slow street. But when I get onto the 3rd street, the street right behind me here, that's Main Street in Newington, Connecticut. Even at 2 o'clock in the morning, there will be cars on Main Street in Newington, Connecticut. And all I've got on is a pair of satin boxers. So I have to make a decision. Do I do this or not? Now, I'm a guy who can't say no to his dog. And so I rationalize it. I say, well, I see guys running around with just shorts and sneakers on like this. Like, I don't look like one of those guys. I'll acknowledge that. But maybe theoretically, if someone drives by, they'll think I'm trying to look like that kind of guy. Maybe I'm a jogger. And so I decide, fine, we'll go. And so I walk down Francis Avenue. I take the right, and I get onto Main Street in Newington, Connecticut. And there are cars. There's trucks and cars driving by. And I'm in there with satin boxers, and that's it. And I'm just about as far as I can get from my house, like right directly behind me, 2 blocks over, when it's one of those moments in your life when it wasn't raining a second ago, but now all the rain that could possibly fall is instantly falling on you. And suddenly I understand why there's no stars in the sky, because the clouds are like probably right over my head. And I know why the birds are chirping so loudly, because they knew what was coming. Kaylee, I suspect, even knew what was coming because she loves the rain. And so now I'm standing on Main Street in Newington, Connecticut in a pair of boxers in the pouring rain. And here's the truth. If I'm not doing homework for life at that point in my life, I pick Kaylee up and I march home. And I go into my bedroom, I take a quick shower, I go to bed, frustrated and annoyed. And 6 months later, I forget it ever happened. That is what happens to us. But instead, I'm doing homework for life. I've developed that lens for storytelling. I have that way of looking at my life that I want you to have. And I look down at Kaylee in the pouring rain, and I think to myself, she's 18 years old. She's an old dog. And we haven't walked like this in a long time. And we haven't walked like this in the rain in a really long time. There was a time when we used to run through the rain together, but we haven't been out like this in forever. And it occurs to me standing there on Main Street that this might be the last time I ever walk this dog in the rain. She's getting older and slower. This might be the last time. And because I have homework for life in my life, because I see my life through this lens of storytelling, I stand there on Main Street in Newington with my dog in the rain, waiting for her to want to go. And that doesn't happen if I'm not doing homework for life. It changes the way I experience that moment because I see things through story. And then, as I said to you, you will crack open, which is what happened to me that night as well. So I'm standing on the corner with her like that. And suddenly I find myself, for whatever reason, thinking about Measelman. Measelman was the dog I grew up with, one of many dogs that I grew up with, but my father's first dog, named after the doctor who gave him his vasectomy, Measelman. And my parents, when I was 7, they got divorced. My father was a cowboy. I grew up on a horse farm until I was 7. Then my mom kicked my father out and replaced him with some terrible man. And so my father left, and he lost the house that his parents had built and the barn that he had built with his own hands. He lost the fields and the ring that the horses ran in. He lost his wife. He lost his kids because very quickly my father disappeared from my life and really hasn't returned in any great degree since then. But standing on that corner that night in the rain with my dog, it's the first time I realize that my father also lost his dog in the divorce, that Mieselman stayed with us, that the man who took his wife and his home and his career also took his dog. And for the first time in my life, standing on that corner, I suddenly saw the losses that my father suffered through the eyes of a man rather than the eyes of a boy. And it crushed me. And that happened on that corner. And then just as quickly, that memory is swept away. A new memory comes. It's a memory of when I was 18 years old and I was on the Walpole Public Golf Course in Walpole, Massachusetts, the 18th green with a girl named Jen. And we were naked on the 18th green as 18-year-olds, fooling around when the sprinklers came on at midnight, producing more water than you could ever imagine. And being on the corner in my boxer shorts in the rain somehow triggered this memory that I had completely forgotten about. Probably the most fun I've ever had with a girl naked outside in my life. A moment I'm so happy that I was able to remember and recover standing on that corner. I cracked open and remembered that. 3 things on that corner that night. My dog in the rain, and my father in Mieselman, and Jen on a golf course all came back to me in that moment because I do homework for life. And I was right. Kaylee passed away about 6 months later, and that was the last time I ever walked with her in the rain. And I'm so glad I have that memory. I'm sitting here at my dining room table now talking to a computer screen, but here's the truth. When I was telling you about that night, when I was telling you about Kaylee in the rain, I stopped seeing myself and stopped seeing this computer screen and stopped seeing this room. For a little bit, I was back on that corner and I could see my friend for 18 years who I missed more than anything. I could see her. I could be there. And I'm so glad I can. I'm so glad I still can because I have homework for life. I'm not asking you to do much to become a great storyteller and to find stories and even to make more meaning out of your life than you have already. I'm asking you to sit down every night before you go to bed and ask yourself, what is the most story-worthy moment of my day? What is the moment from this day that makes it different than any other day? And then to write it down in a few sentences. Less time than it takes to brush your teeth if you're doing it right. That's what I'm asking for you to do. I'm asking you to do it on every day too. I'm not impressed if you find a great story, on the day you get married. I'm not impressed if you find a great story the day you get a flat tire, right? These are days when we have stories. You develop the lens on the days when nothing happens and you force yourself to find something of meaning, even though you would never tell it as a story. Those are the days you work that muscle. You can't miss a day. You cannot miss a day. I would suspect you haven't missed a day of brushing your teeth in 20 years. Make homework for life like that. If you're going to brush your teeth, if you're going to put on shoes, you're going to do homework for life. It'll change your life, I promise you. It's changed mine. It's changed the lives of millions. Now, most of you aren't going to do it. I'm sorry to tell you, because of one or two reasons. The first is you'll lack commitment. You will give your life over every night to a television show like Law and Order, even though we all know how it ends, right? It's all basically the same. It's a show that you will not remember 3 months from now. You'll probably end up watching the same episode again and not even realizing you saw it before. We give our lives over to nonsense like that. I'm asking you to commit 2 to 5 minutes a day to change your life. And some of you won't do it because you lack commitment. If you have the commitment, the other thing that might stand in your way is faith. You may lack the faith to do it. Because what will happen is right now you're excited about it. You're thinking, this is great. It's going to change my life. And you'll do it for a week or two. And then you'll look back on your entries to look for your stories and you'll see nothing. And you'll feel bad about your life. You'll think, I'm not having any underwear in the rain stories happening to me. I'm not having these moments. My life stinks. He's a loser. He's made me feel bad about myself. takes time. It's ridiculous to think you're going to develop the lens in 2 or 3 weeks. Might take you 6 months, might take you a year. But if I tell you you're going to commit to a year of this, and at the end of the year, your life will be totally changed. You'll see it in a new and meaningful way. Would you do it? You would. But will you have the faith to keep going? Lots of people don't. But if we were to go back at my first entries, my first few months of Homework for Life, you'd discover there's not a lot there either. I wasn't seeing the right stuff. I was looking for the big instead of the small. So you got to do it for a while. You got to have the commitment and the faith. If you do, here's the good news. You're better than most people, and that's a good feeling. Most of the people on this call right now, I don't know how many there are actually. There could be one of you, there could be 1,000 of you. I don't know how many people are listening to me right now, but about 10% of them will do it. I know this because here's my deal for you. If you do Homework for Life for 100 days, send me an email, matthewdix@gmail.com. Tell me I've done it for 100 days. I'll send something back to you. Just a little thing. It'll make you smile. It's my way to check to see how many people are doing it. I told you it's not an exaggeration. I get at least one email a day from people who tell me they've done it for 100 days. At least one. So many, many people are doing it, but I know many, many people lack the commitment and the faith to do it. So do it. Find a way to do it for yourself, whether it's a spreadsheet or a notebook. The trick is to make sure you're not writing very much every day, because if you start writing stories every day, it becomes easy to skip because you're not going to have time. That's why I keep it into that single spreadsheet as long as a computer screen. That's all I give me to write. That will be all. That will change. That is enough to make you a great storyteller, because you will start to have more stories to tell than ever before. Just do that, and you'll find so many stories to tell. I'm going to give you a couple more quick exercises that you can do, but that's the one. If you only have time for one, that's the one. If you have to go eat dinner right now, you've just gotten the most important stuff I have to say to you. I'm going to tell you how to tell a story in a minute. I'm going to tell you a story and then tell you how to tell it. But that's the most important thing you can do. Here's 2 more small things that you can do to find stories, but do Homework for Life first. The next one I do is a game. Now, if we were in person, I might actually play this game with you, but we can't. So I'm going to describe it to you. It's a game I play all the time. Sadly, it's a game I play by myself because people are tired of playing it with me. But it's a great game. It's a game based upon the idea that when we're looking for stories in our lives, smaller lenses are often more useful. So, for example, if I told you, tell me a story about a time when you were in love, that would be a hard story for you probably to find, because that creates an enormous net, a wide net over your life. It's really hard to nail something down. It's often easier to tell stories taking a tiny lens into our life. And so what I'm going to propose is that you play this game either by yourself or with someone tonight. It's a simple game. It's called 3-2-1. It's a game I created. Each one of those numbers stands for something. The 3 stands for objects. The game requires you to have 3 random objects with which to work. Now, if you're playing with a partner, that's great. You have your partner, or if we were in a class together, we would get together, and I would have you throw 3 random objects at me. I say objects. Okay, we're looking for nouns, but we're looking for tangible, non-proper nouns, which means you have to be able to touch them. Okay, so a Diet Coke and a hat, these are good nouns. You can touch them, right? Freedom is a noun, but you can't touch it, especially in America today. So freedom doesn't work. Also, proper nouns don't work. You can't say Benjamin Franklin, but you could say scientist, because you can touch a scientist, but we can't touch Benjamin Franklin. He's long since gone. Okay, so no proper nouns. Okay, if you're playing by yourself, there's actually random object generators on the internet that I use all the time. The one that I like the best, maybe they can put this in the they can put this on the screen for you. The website is perchance.org/object. Perchance, perchance.org/object. It is a random object generator. You can put in how many objects you would like it to generate for you, and then you'll get those objects. So I'm actually going to click on the website right now. Thanks, guys. So I'm going to click on the website right now. You can't see me doing it, but I'm going to put in the number 3, and I'm going to click randomize, and it's going to give me 3 words to work with, okay? And so from those 3 words, this is interesting, it's given me zipper, it's given me empty jar, and it's given me sunglasses. Zipper, empty jar, and sunglasses. Those are my three nouns. That's the three in 3, 2, 1. Okay. The next thing is I have to come up with a story. I have to come up with a story using one of those objects from my life. This is the lens I'm going to use into my life to find a new story, hopefully a brand new one, because when I find a new story, I find gold. So I've got zipper. Oh, shoot. I clicked away from the website. What were my three objects? Oh, you can't tell me. How miserable. I'm going to click random again, and I'm not going to click away from the screen this time. Okay, I've got three new ones. Sorry. All right. It's fine. Doesn't matter what they are. So I'll just use these instead. I've got crowbar, pool stick, and teapot. I'm going to leave that right here so I can keep looking at them. Okay. So I'm going to use these three new ones, crowbar, pool stick, and teapot, and find a story from my life. Essentially, I'm going to ask myself, do I have a story about a crowbar? And I think about my life and think, yes, I have a story about a crowbar. Do I have a story about a pool stick? Or a pool stick has to be in the. I do. I have a story that involves a pool stick. And do I have a story about a teapot? I don't drink tea or coffee. I've never even tasted it. So it's unlikely I have a teapot story. I do have a teapot story, actually. I do have a teapot story. Now, in 3, 2, 1, the definition of a story is very loose. It is a 20-second anecdote all the way up to a 2-minute story. That's where the 2 comes from. The 3 is the number of objects you get. Okay. You're going to choose one of them to tell a story about. The 2 is you have up to 2 minutes to tell that story. So 2 minutes to tell it. And then the 1 is you have 1 minute to prepare it. Only 1 minute. I love that pressure. I like the idea that you're sort of improving a story. You should not be spending 5 minutes on it. Just take a minute, figure out what you want to say, take 2 minutes to say it. Now, I'm not going to do it right now for you because I'd like to get to other things, but I will tell you, I have a crowbar story. And it's a story I hadn't thought about as a story before. It's a moment I had forgotten in my life, but it's probably a story that I'm going to use someday. I like it a lot. It's about a car breaking down. It's about me changing a tire. It's about being with a friend who thought it was crazy that I would change my own tire because he would always call AAA or his father. And it was about a discussion really around sort of adulthood and what constitutes adulthood. It's actually a great story. I'm going to use that as a story, so I'm going to add to my list later. Okay. I also had a pool stick story. Now, the pool stick story, it's a date story about a night when I happened to be playing pool with a girl on a date. It's very short. It's like a 30-second story. It's about trouble I had with a girl while playing pool on a date that didn't go well. It would not be worth telling it on the stage, but I'm going to play golf tomorrow. I might tell my buddies the story on the golf course. And the teapot story actually has to do with, if you're an Office fan, you know the value of a teapot in The Office. Pam and Jim. Jim gives Pam a very famous teapot. And it actually, that episode and that gift becomes relevant in my own relationship that I have with my wife right now. In talking about the teapot with Pam and Jim, it sort of changes the course of things for my wife and I in terms of gift giving. I could tell that story too. All 3 of those stories I did not have until this moment, which means now I have 3 new stories. My list of untold stories, remember it was getting shorter and shorter before Homework for Life, it now stands at, I think, around 480 items, which is to say I have 480 stories I have never crafted that I'm still waiting to craft. I have become a guy who used to be worried he was going to run out of stories to tell. Now I have run out of time to tell all those stories. I'm never going to get to all of them. And I've just added 3 new ones to the list. Ask yourself, did you have a crowbar story? Remember, 20 seconds about something involving a crowbar would be enough. Did you have a pool stick story? And did you have a teapot story? I play this game in workshops all the time. I've never run into a single human being that can't tell a story based upon the objects they have been given. Now, in my workshops, admittedly, I always give the 3rd object, and I know which objects generate stories easily. So if the other 2 objects they were given by their classmates are terrible, I can always help you with the 3rd. But if you're doing Homework for Life, the trick is eventually you'll start to see stories everywhere. So you might not see your crowbar story yet because you haven't developed that lens for storytelling. This is a game you can play with friends. It's a game we play at the dinner table all the time. This table, my kids love playing it. You give my son 3 objects. He has to tell a story about his life. He's never failed. Now, we don't give him terrible nouns. You know, I was in a workshop once and the people in the workshop gave me chandelier, potpourri, and fondue pot to see if they could, like, you know, trick me. And it turns out I had a chandelier and a fondue pot story. And I took that chandelier story to the Moth and won a story slam with it. And then emailed that class back and said, screw you guys. It worked. So in my class, you can give me any nouns you want. I'm going to find a story for you. At our dinner table, we give Charlie nouns that we know are going to work for him. He loves playing it. Clara loves playing it. We play it in workshops. People love playing it. You can play it with your family. And then you can do what I do, which is if you're trapped in a meeting, which I am often, a meeting that I am not needed, I shouldn't even be in the meeting, and yet I'm stuck in the meeting. I open up my laptop. I go to perchance.org/object. I hit randomize. On 3, I get 3 new nouns. I've got whistle, lime, and rhino now. I can tell you I have a rhino story already. Okay. So I do it all the time to find stories. It's the idea, once again, that a narrow, focused lens into your life will often find things that you have forgotten. Whereas if I told you, please tell me a story about a time you struggled, you're not going to find anything new. In fact, it's probably going to be hard for you to find a story or pick one or settle on one. But if I say to you, I want to hear a story about a black and white photograph or a toothbrush or a window shade, you probably can find a story from one of those objects. And more often than not, it's a story you didn't realize you had. And even if it's a 20-second story, if you're a storyteller, you know that stories are built on anecdotes quite often. We take small 20-second moments and we pile them up and create stories with them. So even if I find a small, tiny 20-second anecdote, oftentimes there's great value in that for me. Even when there's no storytelling value in it for me, if I suddenly remember something that I had forgotten from my past, I'm the happiest man in the world. I am constantly rebuilding my past. All of those memories that I threw away like trash in the same way you do it right now, I'm looking for them. I'm trying to recover them. I'm trying to capture them. I'm trying to rebuild my past. And every brick that I put into that past, the more complete, the more fulfilled, the more my life feels enormous. Do those 2 things to find stories. Play my game 3, 2, 1 by yourself if you have to, like I do, or with your family or in a car. It's a great thing to do. I've had people try to play it on first dates. I don't recommend it. That's weird. I think if you're trying to impress a date on your first date, playing a game like that is not the best way to go. But in almost every other circumstance, that's a really fun game. And play by yourself, perchance.org/object. A wonderful game to play. All right. In a moment, I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'm going to start crafting it. But what I'd like to do is a couple things. I'd like to give you a chance to get up just for a moment if you need to use the restroom, if you want to grab a drink. I'm going to take 5 minutes right now. I'm not going to go anywhere. I don't need to do anything. I'm going to ask Denise in a moment if there are any questions I can answer. So if you had a question, maybe keep an ear while you're taking care of business. And if you hear me answering your question, you can listen in. It's about to be 3:58. So it's 3:58 Eastern Standard Time. Wherever you are, it's 58. So I'm going to come back at 03. I'm going to be aggressive on that because I still have a lot I want to tell you. So I'm going to come back at 03, whatever hour you're on, and that's when I'm going to begin by telling you a story. But right now, for the next 5 minutes, feel free to get up, get a drink, use the restroom. Denise, if we have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any that we have right now, so please feel free to jump in. If we don't have any questions, you can just stare at me blinking at you, and that would be great too.
Actually, we don't have any questions, so I guess we get to watch you blink. Um,
Well, can I ask you something, Denise?
sure.
You were listening, right? I assume you were paying attention. Did you have any stories for those 3 words that I gave? Did you play?
Um, it was teapot, crowbar, and pool stick.
Yes.
Crowbar, I do remember changing a tire once by myself on my truck.
Okay.
And
And
pool
that would be
stick,
good enough for the game, right? We
okay,
don't have to be super entertaining.
okay.
Okay.
Pool stick makes me think of when I lived in California and we would play pool at the Deuce across the street from the theater I worked at. And we liked it because we knew Sam Shepard used to go there when he was living in that area of California. But we
Did you
would
ever get to
drink.
see him, or is it just a
No,
rumor?
no, I ended up drinking a lot of, I discovered English beer there and drank a lot of that while we were playing pool.
I see.
Teapot. Now that seems like it should be super easy because I'm a tea drinker. And I do remember getting an incredibly square teapot from my mother that she got at a historical society once, and I still have it. And
Oh,
every now and then I'll make some tea and put it in there, and it always makes me think of her.
that's
And
great.
she's been gone for about 5 years now, so it's a nice
Oh,
little keepsake.
so that could be that could be a detail if you were ever going to tell a story about your mother or the passing of your mother. That'd be a great detail to include in that story.
Yeah, yeah, and,
That's great.
she was a big tea drinker, and so we would, I have a bunch of teapots from her actually, but that's my favorite, and that was, like, the
Yeah.
first one she ever gave me.
Well,
So
if you're ever wanting to play the game with people, the trick is, in my workshops, I always give the third noun. So I can
uh-huh.
always save someone if they've given someone terrible nouns. The best nouns tend to be either places.
Oh,
So school is a nice noun, house, kitchen,
okay.
bedroom, park, all of those, any place. Because once you give someone a place, they can often find a story in that
Oh,
place.
yeah.
And then objects that we hold a lot. So silverware is good because lots of things happen at dinner tables. For women, jewelry is often very good because
Mhm.
they just happen to be wearing it quite often. And it's often associated with sort of important moments. You're often putting on your best jewelry for some story worthy type of moment. Cell phones and keys. If you give anyone any part of a car, that means now they can tell the story about something that happened in a car. And oddly, we have a lot of stories that take place inside cars.
Well, yeah, because we travel. I mean, it's integral to our lives for most of us.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
Water is a very nice one because once you say water, you have access to pools and oceans and lakes and kitchens and baths and showers and all of that. And then
yeah.
any noun that has a double meaning, like the word bat, so either you had like I had a
Ah,
bat or a bat, those kinds. So I have a big list actually that I keep that I give to people at the end of a workshop with all the kind nouns that will help people if they need them. But I
writing
really
this down.
I like the hard nouns because that lens that it creates for you, I think, is so great in finding new stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah. As soon as you said crowbar, I was transported to the place when I was living in Berkeley when I came out and my truck had a flat tire and had to get it out and change the tire by myself. And I remember it was a bright sunny day and it was warm. So see, that alone just started
Right.
triggering a whole bunch of things.
I love
So
that. I love that. I'm so happy when someone finds a new story or when I find a new story. I really do feel it. It's like gold because it allows me to have a new way to connect with someone. Like
mhm,
I said, I'm going to play golf with my buddies tomorrow.
right.
I'm the worst golfer on the planet. I am a really terrible golfer, and sadly, I play with really good golfers. And yet, I was asked to play golf by 3 separate groups of people for tomorrow. And
Wow.
the reason is not because I'm a good golfer, because I'm always in the woods or short or in a pond, but it's because when after I hit the ball and we have to
Yeah.
go in the woods to find it, they know I'm going to entertain them. I'm going to have something entertaining to say. So the storytelling is the value add that I
Mm.
have, not the. I'm never going to give anyone a tip on their swing that's going to be of any assistance. In fact, there's one guy that turns around so he doesn't watch me swing because he's
Oh,
afraid that my swing will infect his swing. So it's really bad the way I play, but I get asked all the time to play because I can tell a good story.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the more
I'd
stories I
play
find,
golf with you, and I'm probably a worse golfer than you are. So,
that's really hard to imagine, Denise.
it's very true. I'm not even good at the pee-wee golf, so I'm usually the but one person that has, the most swings. So,
Well, we try to avoid that.
well,
All right. I think we're at
absolutely.
4:03, right? Is that
Yep, we
yeah.
are.
So we're at 03 wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in. Great. All right. Nice seeing you, Denise. Jump in at any point if it needs to happen. Okay.
Okay, well,
All right. Thanks. All right. So if you do have questions, feel free to fire away. It's 03, whatever your time zone is. My goal is to land at 45. That's when I plan on being done and taking questions. So I want to give you ample time to fire away if you have anything that you'd like to ask. And if it's pertinent to the moment, Denise will jump in and interrupt me if I've been unclear about anything at all. So as I said, the first half is finding stories from your life. Those 2 things will change your life, I promise you. Now we need to talk about actually how to put those stories together. Once you have a good story to tell, hopefully it's a small moment and maybe not a big moment. There's nothing wrong with telling big moment stories, but I say if you're getting started in this, try the smaller moments first. They're easier to tell. So I'm going to tell you a story right now, and then I'm going to use it to help you understand some of the things that I'm doing in crafting stories, the big 3 strategies I'm going to give you. Um, I was trying to choose a story to tell you. I think I'll tell you this one. I'm telling it to you because it happened somewhat in the kitchen over there, and I looked over in the kitchen and thought, oh, I'll tell them that story. There's only one moment that happens in the kitchen, but actually, does it happen? It doesn't at all. I just told my wife the story for the first time in the kitchen, so that's why I'm thinking about it. It goes something like this. Oh, you should know I don't memorize my stories. I only remember them, and I would recommend that too. If you memorize stories, I think that's weird. There's something that I call the dinner test, which is to say the story I'm about to tell you should be a close cousin to the same type of story I would tell you at dinner. If you and I were having dinner tonight and I was going to tell you the story I'm about to tell you, it should sound kind of the same. If we were having dinner, you'd interrupt me a little bit, ask me clarifying questions. I might pause, but it's going to basically sound like what I'm about to say. If I was memorizing stories and you were having dinner with me and it was clear that I was telling you a memorized story, that would be really, really weird. I think it prevents you from connecting to human beings, and it strips you of your vulnerability if you've just memorized the story. So I remember them, which is to say I'll remember some of the important sentences, the transition sentences, the laugh lines. I remember the scenes. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's how I sort of remember my story, but I don't memorize the words. So if I was to tell you the story now and then in an hour I'd tell it to you again, you'd discover that it sounds different each time. It's the same story, but told with different words. Not all different words, but there will be different words. So anyway, here's the story. It goes something like this. When did it happen? About a year ago. Yeah, I guess it was just about a year ago. Back when we could go to the gym and be around other people. So about a year ago, I'm leaving the gym. I've just completed a workout. I've just completed 45 minutes on the treadmill, and I am feeling extremely good about myself. It's that rare moment in my day. It's that moment when I have just exercised for about 45 minutes and I have not yet eaten a cheeseburger. It's this delicious sliver of my life that does not last very long, but it's this moment in my life when I know that I'm better than everybody else. It's a moment when I know I've just worked my ass off for 45 minutes and I am tired and I am sweaty and I have not yet sort of spoiled all of that effort by eating a cheeseburger. And so I'm feeling good about myself. And I come down the stairs of the gym and I'm coming around the smoothie bar heading towards the exit, feeling great, when the keys that I'm holding in my hands slip and fall out because my hands are still sweaty. They slip, and when they fall, they sort of land on my shoe, sort of half on my shoe and half off. And before I have time to bend over to pick them up, a woman coming into the gym, walking in the opposite direction, bends over, picks up my keys and puts them in my hand, and then just keeps going. And I can't believe it. I would never pick up keys for someone who dropped them in the way that this woman has just done. I have a friend who's in a wheelchair, and if he dropped his keys, I think I would do the mental trigonometry to determine if he could reach his keys before I would attempt to reach them for him. Yet this woman has just picked up the keys, put them in my hand, and then didn't even stop. Didn't wait for a thank you or a parade or a cash reward. All of the things that I would expect if I had done something as generous as she has just done. No, she just keeps walking. She goes back to that room filled with those stationary bikes where she's going to get on a bike that's going nowhere and be yelled at by some authoritarian in spandex that she's not going nowhere fast enough. She's gone off to that hellhole, and I am standing here looking at my keys in shock. And I suddenly realize what a terrible person I am and how many terrible things I have done just to get myself to this point today. Before I came to the gym today, I went to the Stop and Shop to get myself a Gatorade for my workout. And as I was walking into the Stop and Shop, I saw that the Boy Scouts were outside the door at a little card table selling candy bars. And I hate the Boy Scouts selling candy bars outside the grocery store. I hate it for a whole bunch of reasons. One is that they're selling something that is also in the grocery store for sale too. So it's like a hat on a hat. Like, at least sell something that I can't get already in the grocery store. And I just hate to be bothered. The strategy that I used to use with the Boy Scouts is as I'd walk by and they say, "You want to buy a candy bar?" I'd say, "I'm sorry, guys, all I have is a credit card." But now these little sons of bitches, they have phones, and their phones can take my credit card. So when I say, "I'm sorry, I only have a credit card," they say, "No problem, we can take credit cards." So what I do now, what I did on this day, is I pretend to be on a phone call. I take my phone and I hold it to my ear and I pretend that I am in the midst of an enormously important call and I cannot look at them for a moment. So I just sort of wave at them like I'm on the phone. "Sorry, guys." And I walk in. I did that on this day. And I grew up as a Boy Scout. The Boy Scouts saved my life. The Boy Scouts sent me to camp every year on candy bar sales and Christmas tree sales. And yet I didn't give those boys $1. Instead, I ignored them and went into the store. And then when I was done in the store and I had my Gatorade, I went out the opposite entrance and I did a square all the way around the parking lot just to avoid the Boy Scouts. I did all of that on this day. And then when I arrived to the gym, as I was approaching the door, I was maybe 25 feet away from the door. I noticed that there was another person, a woman, coming towards the door, sort of at an angle from me. And I did, again, some mental trigonometry, and I realized that I'm going to arrive at the door about 10 seconds before she will, which means I will have to hold the door. And I hate holding the door for other people like this. I can't stand it because I feel like I'm 10 seconds ahead of in life compared to that woman. Like something that I've done over the course of the day, maybe I woke up a little earlier, maybe I was a little more efficient in some way. I am right now 10 seconds ahead in life. But because of this social requirement that I have to hold the door for her, I'm now going to allow her to catch up. I'm going to lose my lead just because of polite society. So what I did on this day is I quickened my pace. I turned 10 seconds into 20 seconds. And at 20 seconds, I felt like the social obligation was gone. And I slipped through the door without holding it for her. I did that on this day. And then when I was done my workout, I know I'm required to wipe down the machine, but I also hate that. I feel like I've just done 45 minutes of God's work and now I have to wipe my sweat off the machine. And honestly, if we're adhering to the golden rule, I don't care if anyone ever wipes the machine down. I don't care about their sweat on the machine. The golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So if I don't want anyone to wipe a machine for me, I should not wipe a machine for them. It's the way the world should work. But I know that's not how the world works. I know that I am required to do this thing. So I wiped down the machine on this day, but I did it poorly. That is sort of the way I handle this, is I passive aggressively wipe down the machine, not very well. I did all three of those things. And then I dropped my keys on the ground and some random lady picked them up and put them in my hand without even waiting for a thank you. I'm standing there at the smoothie bar looking at my keys and thinking, you're the worst person in the world. And so a week later, I'm back at the gym. I'm pulling into the parking lot, and it's a day when it's raining cats and dogs. Like, it is pouring out. And so it's going to be one of those days when I'm not going to find a parking spot, and I'm going to have to park over by the warehouse, way over in the corner. By the time I get into the gym, I am going to be a wet rat. But as I pull into the parking lot, I see that the spot closest to the door, the spot my kids call the best spot in the lot, that car is pulling out. And I realize I'm going to get the best spot in the lot. I am not going to be a wet rat after all. And so as I'm waiting for that car to pull out, I see headlights appear in my rearview mirror, and I see someone behind me waiting for me to take the spot so they can go park in the warehouse lot. And then my eyes come from the rearview mirror down to the steering wheel, and I see my keys dangling in the ignition. Those damn keys. And I think about what that woman did for me last week. She picked them up from me. And then I do something unimaginable. When that spot is empty and it's my turn to take it, I drive by it. I drive all the way to the warehouse and I give the person who's behind me the spot. Probably a serial killer, whoever it is. They get the best spot in the lot. And I end up like a wet rat that day. I am not saying I'm a better person in any way whatsoever. I still dodge the Boy Scouts outside of Stop and Shop. I still hate holding doors for other people if I'm ahead of them. And I still, or at least I used to before COVID, I used to passively aggressively wipe down the machines. But occasionally, especially when I've got my keys in my hand and I'm thinking about that woman, occasionally I decide to be a better person. And occasionally trying to be a slightly better person, that's at least a start. Thank you. All right, so that is the story. I told my wife that story in the kitchen. I didn't tell her the second half of the story because that didn't happen until a week later. But I remember I came home that night and I said, honey, I dropped my keys and a woman picked them up and put them in my hand. And I did a lot of terrible things before that. I've got a great story. And I remember she was cooking dinner and she said, okay, Matt, that's great. But I remember right away that was going to be a great story. I knew it. Now, I was really happy about the second half of that story when I gave up the best spot in the lot. And I did not do that for the sake of the story. That did not occur to me till later. But I want you to think about that story. Before I start talking about the crafting of stories, think about how small that is, right? I'm a guy who has never told the story about the trial he was on for his life, for his freedom, for his future career as a teacher. All of those things, I haven't told that story, but I was excited about a moment when I dropped my keys and a woman put them back in my hand. And I thought, I'm a selfish person. I got to be a little bit better. That was it. You have those moments all the time. You don't notice them. And if they do notice them, you allow them to be forgotten. So stories can be about little things. That is a very popular story that people want to hear all the time. And I know why. It's because you're all selfish in some terrible way. We all are. We all do something we're not always so proud of. And when someone dares to speak about sort of their unsavory nature, they're willing to speak about their shame, their failure, the things that make them not so good, that makes other people feel better. So often we walk through life thinking that we're the only one, like we're the rotten one, we're the bad one, we're the one who feels ashamed, when really the problem is nobody else is talking about their shame. I love talking about my stupidity. Just a year ago, my wife and I were going to the movies with our friends David and Shira. We're all piled in the car, and we pulled into a CVS in Hartford. And I ran in to get candy, to buy some candy. And as I ran up the candy aisle, it was one of these weird moments. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, where you're in a store and they didn't entirely level the ground out. It often happens in cities. And so there was like a hill in the middle of the aisle, like an undetectable rise in the floor. And as I ran, my toe of my sneaker caught the hill, and I went sprawling. I scraped my chin on the industrial carpet. I went sliding and just landed. I belly flopped on the floor in the middle of the candy aisle in CVS. And a woman at the end of the aisle saw it all happen and started laughing at me. And I thought instantly, I can't wait to get in the car and tell Alicia and our friends what I've just done. That is who I am. Whenever I do something shameful or stupid or clumsy or embarrassing, I can't wait to tell people about it, because I know that when I do those things, people don't think less of me. Never. They never, ever do. They always feel closer to me. They always feel more connected to me, and they always want to tell me things. I am the bearer of more secrets than you could ever begin to imagine. I step off stages, and people tell me secrets all the time after telling a story like that. 5 times in my life, 5 times, I have stepped off the stage and had a woman come up to me and tell me about her miscarriage. And all 5 times, I was the only person she had ever spoken to about her miscarriage. The first time it happened, it was in New York. It was a housing works on Crosby Street. I stepped off the stage telling a story completely unrelated to miscarriages or babies or anything, just a vulnerable story like the one I just told you. And the woman came up and she just spilled her guts to me about the miscarriage. Someone I had never met before. I couldn't believe it. I got into the car at the end of the night. I called my wife. I said, honey, you're not going to believe what just happened. And Alicia said, no, I believe it. She said, of course, that's what happens. Now, Alicia had a miscarriage once. And she explained to me, and I understand it to a degree, that even though it's not ever a woman's fault, that's a normal thing that happens. She explained to me that you can't help but wonder, did I do something wrong? You can't help but be ashamed. She also pointed out to me that oftentimes you haven't even told someone that you were pregnant and now you have a miscarriage. And that's a hard conversation to tell your friend, I was pregnant, by the way, but now I've had a miscarriage. That's an awkward thing to do. And so I stood on a stage, I made myself vulnerable. I opened my heart up, and someone found me as a person who they could share something with. Also, Alicia pointed out to me, it's helpful that that woman didn't need to see me the next day, that I wasn't like her cubicle mate, that it was someone who, you could sort of offer a secret and then move on with life. That dispensing of a secret meant a lot. It's happened to me 5 times. Just a few months ago, I was in New York and I stepped off a stage and a woman came up to me and she grabbed me. She held me really close and she whispered, yelled at me. She said, every time I go into someone's house, even my mother's house, I have to steal something. And then she got really close to me and she said, I've never told anyone that before. Again, I didn't tell a story about stealing. I didn't tell a story about kleptomania. I just made myself an open vessel where she shared something. I was actually at a high school earlier this year, and a boy came up to me after my presentation. He grabbed me by the arm and he said, I have to pee in the corner of the boys' bathroom. I don't pee in the urinal, and I don't know why. And then he ran away, right? That boy was carrying a burden, and he felt I was the person to tell. When we are willing to tell stories about the moments that we're not so proud of, we connect to people. We get closer to them. We become safe. Those are the stories people want to hear. So we're looking for those stories too. No one is interested in your hero stories except for your parents. The stories of your enormous successes, tell your parents. Tell them properly in a job interview. But tomorrow on the golf course, when I'm with my buddies, I will not be telling them stories about my successes. I will be telling them about the time I fell down in CVS and cut my chin, right? Or actually last week when I when I ducked under a branch on my bike, thinking I was ducking under it, not seeing that large branch that nailed me in the chest and sent me flying and skinned my knee and sent some woman running out of her house saying, "Should I call 911?" And I said, "Only if the ambulance is bringing dignity, because that's all I need right now." Right? That's a story I will tell, because that's the kind of thing people want to hear. All right. So to tell a story like that, to tell any story like that, we have to understand a few things. My three principles that I'm going to teach you. Okay. Learn these three. You'll be better than most of the storytellers in the world today. The first thing you have to know is, what is a story? Because most people don't understand what a story is. Most people feel that stories are things that happen to us over the course of time, told chronologically. Something happened. I'm going to tell it to you. And then when that thing stopped happening, that's when I'll stop talking. The classic one is sort of like a vacation story. You say, "How was your vacation?" And the person goes, "Well, on Sunday, we arrived at the hotel," and you realize you're in for the whole vacation and you regret ever asking, right? The classic one is, your spouse comes home from work and you say, "How was your day?" And your spouse says, "Well, at 9 o'clock," and they start to give you give the entire day over. That's not a story. That's sort of like just reliving your life at the expense of your listener. That is not a story. A story is essentially about change in a human being's life. It is one of two things. It is either transformation or realization, which is to say, transformation, I used to be one kind of a person, and then some stuff happened. That's the story. And now I'm a different kind of person. I changed over time. The other one is realization. I used to think one thing, and then some stuff happened, and now I think a new thing, right? The story I just told you is one of those. I used to think I was kind of a great guy, and then some stuff happened, and I realized I'm kind of a selfish guy. Once you understand that, you'll be able to begin telling stories. Most stories are not told like that. Most stories are not told with great beginnings and endings, which we'll talk about in a second. Most stories are just people think about stuff that happened to them, and then they tell people what happened to them. That is just a recounting of your day or a recounting of the hour you just experienced. It's not a story. Once we understand what a story is, change over time. And that goes for all things. That is movies, that is books, that is television shows, and that is stories that you hear on stages. All of them are the same. Anything that is good, and even the bad ones, they're all about change over time. It doesn't matter what it is. Someone just emailed me the other day and said, what's the movie that has Maximus in it? The Roman movie. Gladiator. Thank you, honey. Someone emailed me just the other day and said, "Matt, what is the gladiator? What is Maximus's change over time?" And I explained it to him. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but every movie has it. Even the bad ones have it. I can't think of a bad movie that doesn't have it. Okay. When Harry Met Sally is a great example, right? At the beginning of the movie, they don't love each other. At the end of the movie, they do love each other. That's all it is, right? All romantic comedies are essentially that. Change over time. Okay. Transformation to realization. Once you understand that, you can start telling stories. The first thing you need to do to construct your story is to begin at the end. Because if we acknowledge that stories are about transformation or realization, change over time, you have to have a change to tell a story. Something had to happen where suddenly you became something new, and now you have a story to tell. In the story I just told you, the thing that happened to me was a woman put my keys in my hand, and I realized I'm not a good person. That is my realization. That is essentially the end of my story, is the moment where I realize I'm not a nice person. Now, the fact that I give that spot over to that person in the parking lot a week later, that's sort of a little add on to the story, but the story in my mind really ends the moment I discover I'm a selfish person. But that's how that story works. Okay. We start at the end with the moment of realization or transformation. I call these moments 5-second moments because I think they almost always happen over the course of 5 seconds. I think they're almost always instantaneous. I think you used to think one thing, and on a whole bunch of stuff happened, and then in one singular moment you went, "Oh, now I think this." Right? Think about when Harry met Sally. Actually, Harry says it. Right? When he finally catches up to Sally on New Year's Eve, she says, "Why are you here, Harry?" And he says, "Because in the moment you realize that you want to be with someone for the rest of your life, you want to start being with that person as soon as possible." He says it. The moment he realizes he wants to be with her for the rest of his life. That's the story. In the beginning of the story, he hates her. He genuinely hates her. And at the end of the story, he has a singular moment when he realizes this is the person I want to be with for the rest of my life. We start at the end, though. We can't start at the beginning because we have to start with a moment of realization or transformation. That's a great place to start too, because once you start at the end and you realize what your story is actually about, now all of your decisions can serve that final moment. So when you wonder what to include and what not to include in a story, you ask yourself, what is my story about? It's not about a day, it's about a singular moment in that day, a singular moment of transformation or realization. And once you understand that, now all of your decisions serve that final moment. Now you have the end of your story. For me, the end of my story, oh, I'm a selfish person. To begin the story, to find the beginning, because that is the next step, to create what I call a frame for your story, a beginning and an end, you simply ask yourself, what's the opposite of the end of my story, right? At the end of my story, I discover I'm a selfish person. I'm not a good person. What's the opposite of being a rotten person? It's being a good person, right? If you remember the beginning of my story, I have just exercised and not yet eaten a cheeseburger. I tell you, it's the sliver of time where I feel better than everyone else in the world, right? That's where I start because, first of all, it's true. I always feel great after a workout. Frankly, I got off a bike about half an hour before I began this call, and I was feeling great about myself. I rode a bike for 10 miles, came home, took a shower, put the headset on. I feel great about myself. I have not yet eaten a cheeseburger. We're having a cookout tonight. I think I'm going to have a hot dog, but it's basically a cheeseburger, right? But right now, I feel better than most of you. I start my story in a place where I feel great about myself, better than everybody else. And then I end my story in a place where I realize I'm selfish. If you think about the actual story, how much time takes place in the actual story, it's essentially I come down some stairs, I walk around a smoothie bar, I drop my keys, and someone puts them in my hand. That's the story. That's really all the actual stuff that happens in the story. Now, what do I have to do is provide some context to you to make you understand how terrible I am. And so that's why I give you the information about Stop and Shop, the holding of the door, and the wiping of the equipment, right? That is me dropping some backstory in so that you can sort of understand the kind of person you're dealing with, right? But that's all that really happens in that story. Not much. Again, pointing out to you, you don't need much to tell a good story. You almost need nothing to tell a good story. You just need a moment. You need a 5-second moment, and they're all over the place. Harry Met Sally, same thing. There's other great examples. One of my favorites is if you've ever seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first Indiana Jones movie, right? It's Steven Spielberg. If you think about the movie, you think it's about Nazis and snakes and whips and things, but that's not what the movie's about. Okay. If we think about that movie very carefully, think about the beginning of the movie. At the beginning of the movie, the government comes to Indiana Jones and says, Indiana, the Nazis are looking for the Ark of the Covenant. Why would they be doing this? And Indiana says, oh, well, there's a mumbo jumbo hocus pocus rumor that an army that carries the Ark of the Covenant cannot be defeated. It's nonsense. He discards the religiosity of the Ark. He ignores all of that. He doesn't believe in it. He's an archaeologist and a scientist. He agrees to go hunting for it, though, because he's an archaeologist. He wants to find it, not because he thinks it has any power, because he makes it clear to the government people he doesn't believe in that nonsense. Yet he goes out to look for it, right? That's the story. At the end of the story, what happens? He's on an island with the Nazis. The Nazis have the Ark of the Covenant. They're getting ready to open it. Indiana is tied to a stake with his girlfriend, Marion, the woman he loves. They are about to open the Ark of the Covenant. It is the thing he has waited all of his life to do, to see what is inside. And what does he do? He tells Marion, close your eyes, Marion. Don't look. And he closes his eyes too. Why? Because over the course of the movie, Indiana Jones has found religion. He has found a belief in the power of God. And it's the belief in the power of God that saves his life and Marion's life while all the Nazis melt. Indiana Jones is a story about a man who does not believe in God and the faith and the power in the Lord. And over the course of time, some stuff happens. And at the end of the story, his faith in God saves his life. That's what the story is really about. And that's why you leave that story and go, oh, that was a good movie. Because there's a real story hiding in there. You think it's whips and snakes and Nazis because that's what Spielberg uses to get you to come into the theater, but he tells you an actual story at the same time. Almost every Spielberg story does that. I don't have time to tell you about Jurassic Park, but boy, I'll tell you, Jurassic Park is a story about a man and a woman who can't fundamentally be together because the man doesn't want to have children and the woman does. That's what that story is really about. Now go watch the movie and see it happen. It's true. That's what you have to do, though. You have to create a story that has a beginning and an end that are in conversation with each other. They're in opposites of each other. Romantic comedies are obvious. They don't love each other, then they do love each other. Okay, story I just told you. I thought I was a great guy. Turns out I'm a bad guy. Okay, they have to be opposites or approximate opposites to each other. And that way you'll demonstrate change over time. And that's great because now you have a great beginning and ending to a story because most people don't do things like that. Most people start their story at the beginning of their day or the first thing that pops in their head. And most stories don't actually have endings. The endings of most stories are like a bell rings, dinner ends, suddenly someone has to leave, right? Oftentimes stories don't actually have endings in the real world because nobody has an ending. Instead, they just run out of time. My father-in-law loves to tell stories. He's telling me a story right now. He lives in the Berkshires, an hour and a half from me. And the only reason I'm not hearing his stories because I'm not there, but I'm confident he's still telling it because that's how Jerry tells stories. They just never end. That's how most people tell stories. I want you to have a solid beginning and end. If you do that, you're better than 90% of the people telling stories today. Truly better than 90% of people telling stories today just by doing that. So imagine whatever story you're going to tell, whatever moment of transformation or realization, ask yourself, what's the opposite of that moment of transformation or realization? And now you have the frame for your story. Once you have your frame, okay, so we acknowledge what is a story. We understand that it's about a moment of realization and transformation. We create that frame that has the opposites. Start watching movies and watch it happen. You should be able to watch the first 15 minutes of most movies and know how that movie is going to end. It doesn't mean it's going to ruin it. We all knew when Harry met Sally, we knew they were going to fall in love at the end. It didn't ruin it for us, though. We loved getting there. We didn't know how it was going to happen. But if you watch the first 15 minutes of most movies, you will know how the movie's going to end. Most TV shows, too. My wife doesn't allow me to speak to her during movies anymore because I ruin everything. And that is true. So it'll happen to you, too. So start paying attention to that. Okay. So the last of the big three tricks, this is an easy one, but it's a good one. Okay. We have to acknowledge that if we're telling stories, excuse me, the world today, if we're telling stories, what we're doing is we're creating movies in the minds of our audience. That's really what we are. We're verbal cinematographers. We're trying to put pictures in people's minds. Okay. In the best circumstances, I think that really happens. I think we create a movie in people's minds. In the very best circumstances, I think people forget who they are and where they are. Now, this is not the best of circumstances. When I told you that story, I'm on an internet and I can't even see you. I only see myself, right? And it's the middle of the day for me, and I've got a cat walking across the way, and my wife was making bread over there a minute ago, right? And you may have things like that going on in your home right now. This is not the best of circumstances. But if I'm on a stage and a spotlight is trained on me, and you're in a comfortable chair, and the lights are turned down, and maybe you have a glass of wine in your belly, and the seat is comfortable, and the temperature is turned up just a little bit, I think I can transport you. Maybe today I did a little bit. Maybe for a moment you forgot where you were, and you were in the gym with me by a smoothie bar watching a woman put keys in my hand. Maybe you saw it in your mind's eye. I hope you did. I saw Kaylee today on the corner over there in the rain, right? That's what stories do for you. If you think I'm crazy, I'm not. Like, just imagine the way movies work. Same thing. You forget who you are and where you are. Remember the end of Titanic? Remember how you cried, and don't tell me you didn't when Jack died, right? Why'd you cry? Like, that's just Leonardo DiCaprio. He's going to be in Revolutionary Road like next month, right? He's getting paid $10 million to pretend to be in the North Atlantic with Kate Winslet. Neither one of them is going to die. Objectively, you know that. In fact, Jack and Rose, the two characters they play, they're the only non-historical characters in the entire movie. At least all the other characters were actually representing real people who died and who were in that tragedy. Jack and Rose are the only two fictional people in the movie, and yet you cry at the end of it. Even though you know it's all fake, objectively. Why? Because we forget who we are and we forget where we are. For a moment, we're in the North Atlantic with Jack and Rose, and we forget we even exist. That's what storytellers can do. What we're trying to do is create movies in the minds of our audience so they forget where they are and who they are. In the best circumstances, they forget that you're even there too. It's why when I perform, I always wear a pair of blue jeans, a black t-shirt, and a baseball cap. I want to be as physically irrelevant as possible to my audience. Someone once told me listening to stories listening to me tell stories to them was like listening to an audiobook, and I loved that. What they were really saying is, you just became a voice in my head, and that's what I want to become. In order to do that, we have to put pictures in people's minds. And the way we do it is we tell stories not in words, but in scenes. We create scenes for our audience. And the simple way to create a scene is to make sure that in every single moment of your story, your audience understands where you are. You provide them with a physical location. That's it. Think about the story I just told you. It opens with, I'm at the gym, coming down a set of stairs, and I'm coming around a smoothie bar. Right? That's all I said, by the way. I didn't tell you anything else. And that's important too, I think. I'll get to that in a second. After I was at the gym, I was outside the Stop and Shop with the Boy Scouts. I was coming back into the gym and holding the door. I was on the machine wiping it down poorly. I was back in front of the smoothie bar holding my keys. A week later, I'm in my car waiting for a parking spot. Not one moment in that story could you have not told me where I was. Most people don't tell stories like that. Most people start stories with things like, let me tell you something about my mother. Right? Well, first of all, no one's ever wanted to hear the next sentence of that story in the history of the world. But also, it doesn't create a picture in my mind. What it does is essentially tell me, I'm about to give you an essay or a list about the qualities that make up my mother. And that does not sound very entertaining to me. Now, if you started the story with, it's 9 o'clock on a Wednesday and I'm creeping out of my bedroom window, I'm running away for the third time because I can't stand my mother. Let me tell you something about my mother. Well, now I'm in. First of all, I got a scene in my head. I got someone creeping out of a window, right? Probably a teenager. I don't know how old you are yet, but let's imagine it's a teenager. I see a teenager creeping out of a window, and now I've got a question. Why? Why do you run away from your mother so much? Is it your fault? Is it her fault? Is this a story about a bad mother or a foolish son? What is happening? But I created a picture in your mind so that you could see it. And that's the trick. Most people don't tell stories like that. A lot of times they don't tell stories like that because they feel like the audience needs some information before the story gets started, but that's nonsense too. Imagine a movie like Apollo 13, the Tom Hanks film, right? That is a movie that requires you to understand 1960s space travel in order for that movie to make sense to you, right? But does Tom Hanks start the movie by appearing on screen and saying, ladies and gentlemen, before this movie begins, I need to explain a little bit about 1960s space travel so you understand it, right? That would not be the way to start that movie, right? Instead, the movie begins with a scene and action. And as the movie progresses, we learn about what we need to know when we need to know it. We learn the information along the way in the midst of scenes. We don't stop stories to say, before we move on, you have to understand the nature of New Orleans at Mardi Gras. No, you don't, because you just stopped the movie in my head, right? Does that happen in a real movie? Right? Does the movie suddenly stop and the usher say, listen, before the movie continues, you need to understand the nature of New Orleans at Mardi Gras? No, we learn it through scenes. We hear it through dialogue. That is what we have to do. We create scenes in the mind of our audience. The other thing you can do to create a scene is please don't use adjectives unless you absolutely have to. So many people tell me that my stories are so vivid. How do I create such clear and vivid images in their minds? The trick is I don't use adjectives and I don't use adverbs. Instead, I use good, hard nouns. I told you that I am coming down a set of stairs in a gym coming around the smoothie bar. I told you nothing else. Now, I don't know what kind of gym you put me in. Maybe you put me in one of those one of those boxing gyms. Maybe you put me in a really fancy swank gym, or maybe you put me in a $10 a month gym, right? Maybe you put me in a gym with a lot of brushed metal, or maybe you put me in a gym with a lot of brick. Maybe you put me in a dingy gym. It doesn't matter to me, right? I don't know why it matters to storytellers that we see the exact gym that they were within. What I do instead is I say gym, and I rely on you to use your power of imagination to fill things in. When I use a good hard noun, You imagine everything for me. And the truth is, the power of your imagination will always be more powerful than the power of my words. In fact, if I start describing the gym to you, if I start telling you what kind of gym it is, I'm going to create sort of mental taxation on you. I'm going to require you to start building stuff in your head to make this story make sense to you. And so rather than enjoying the story, you're going to have to start hearing about the tanning salons that I walked by before I got to the smoothie bar, and whether the smoothie bar was brushed metal or was it brick or was it wood, and were there little tables on the side, which there were, and were there floor to ceiling windows, which there were. None of that matters to the story, right? Jim, I let you fill it in. Good hard nouns. Got to Stop and Shop, right? Now, I assume everyone knows what Stop and Shop is. Maybe if I'm in Brazil, I say grocery store instead, right? But Stop and Shop, that's all I have to say. That's the only thing I have to say. Now I'm outside the gym holding the door. You have no idea what the name of the gym is. You have no idea what it looks like. It doesn't matter. It's a building with a door. You filled it in. You did it for me. And then I was on the treadmill. I trust you all to know what a treadmill looks like, right? All of those things, good hard nouns, no adjectives. That is my recommendation for you when you're creating scenes. Good, hard nouns. People have to be able to see you in a spot as quickly as possible in that scene. It's also how I remember my stories. Rather than memorizing words, I remember scenes. Oh, I'm going to come down the stairs and go by the smoothie bar. That's a scene for me. I'm going to drop my keys. That's another scene for me, right? Drop my keys and get them picked up. That's a scene. Then I'm going to be at Stop and Shop with the Boy Scouts. That's a scene for me. Then I'm going to be holding the door. That's a scene for me. Then I'm going to be back up at the treadmill, not wiping it down. That's a scene for me. I'm going to be back at the smoothie bar, reminding everybody I still got the keys. That's what I've been thinking about. That's a scene. And then a week later, I'm going to be in my car. That's a scene. I remember those scenes. The words don't always come out the same, but the scenes come out the same. A great way to remember your story. Even better, though, tell your story in scenes and you activate the imagination of your audience, no matter what is happening. The other thing you want to be careful about doing is if you've gone on for a long time, sometimes the audience needs a reminder of where you were, which is why I come back to the smoothie bar. After I go from Stop and Shop to the holding of the door to the treadmill, I remind you, I say, so I'm standing by the smoothie bar holding my keys thinking I'm a terrible person. I just do that to refix your mind as to where I have been while I've been talking about these other places. Sorry, my cat loves me so much. You can't have me right now, Pluto. So tell your story in scenes. I just gave you 3 big tips for telling stories, and they're simple, I think. The first is understanding fundamentally what a story is, which is it's a 5-second moment in our life, a moment of realization or transformation. That's number 1. Number 2 is create a frame for your story by understanding that the beginning and the end of the story need to be approximately opposites of each other. They need to be in some kind of a conversation with each other where I used to be one thing and then some stuff happened and now I'm the different thing. I call it a thesis statement. If you're in a workshop with me, I often say, tell me the thesis statement of your story. And if you can't tell me the thesis statement, you're not ready to tell your story. The thesis statement of the story I just told you was, I used to think I was a really great person and then some stuff happened and I realized I was a selfish person. Once you can do that, all of your decisions become so obvious. Like you know what to put in a story and you know what not to put in a story. It becomes very easy for you. Okay. So that's number 2, create that frame. And the third one is tell your story in scenes, a physical location at each time. And every time your physical location changes, you tell your audience where you are and use good hard nouns, no adjectives or as few as possible. And God, no adverbs. Nobody uses adverbs in real conversation. So if you're using adverbs in your stories, it sounds like you're writing stuff and sounds like you're trying to be fancy. Okay? If you do just those 3 things, you're going to be better than almost every storyteller in your life. Unless you have a storyteller like me in your life, truly, you will be the best because most people aren't making those things happen at all. The truth about storytelling is more than words and craft and all of that, more than delivery, it's mostly about decision making. Most people don't think before they speak. They just say the first thing that comes to their mind. Storytellers are decision makers. Before they speak, they make decisions. Now, at this point, if you're beginning, those decisions are going to be harder and take longer for you. But for me, falling down in that CVS and having that woman laugh at me by the time I got back to the car, I knew exactly how to tell that story. I knew how it was a moment of realization and transformation for me. I knew exactly how to do it. And if you do it often enough, it becomes automatic. Play 3, 2, 1. Tell those stories, improv them all the time. becomes automatic for you. Do those three things, you'll be better than most people who are telling stories today. Okay, so you're going to find stories using Homework for Life in 3-2-1. I have many other strategies I can share with you. If you get my book or you're listening to my podcast or you go to my website, there's lots of other things you can do to find stories. And then use those big three techniques. Like I said, I've got 100 more. I've got hundreds more. I've got strategies for humor and surprise. Oh, I love talking about surprise. I could have done 2 hours just on how important surprising your audience is, how important it is to preserve, protect, and enhance your surprises in your stories. I could talk to you forever about that. The importance of beginnings and endings, and the importance of landing point, all of these things I could talk to you about. My book has a lot of it. My podcast has a lot of it. I do workshops where I talk a lot about it. Many, many things. But those big three, just do those three. You're better than most people. You'll be much better than most people. Okay? All right, we have about 15 minutes, so we've got two things we can do. One is I could tell you one more story and give you a trick from it, give you one more hint, or I can take questions if we have questions. So, Denise, I don't know if we have questions. If we do, I can answer the questions. If not, I can tell a story and give them one more tip. So why don't you jump in and just let me know what direction we should go in.
Tell a story.
Tell a story. Okay, great.
Yeah, we don't have any questions. You've been going just strong, and I think everybody understands what's going on. So I think we'd like to hear you again.
All right. Well, I'll tell a story that I usually tell in most of my workshops. I tell it because it's got a good, it's got something good to teach you. Okay. It's probably my most popular story. It's the story that ends up on the radio all the time. So hopefully you haven't heard it. And if you have, sorry, you've watched Pretty Woman probably 12 times. So listen to my story twice, right? That's the beauty of storytelling, right? You're willing to watch the same movie 100 times because you love it so much. So that's what stories can do too. All right, here's one more story for you. When did this happen? I tell it all the time. It's December 23rd, 1988. I'm 17 years old. I'm coming out of a record store, which is a physical location where you used to go to purchase music in a physical form. I'm coming out of it. I step out onto the sidewalk. I got a shopping bag in my hand. And as I turn left, I see my friend Pat walking down the street towards me. Pat sees the shopping bag in my hand and he asks me what it is. And I tell him it's a Christmas present. It's a surprise Christmas present. It's a surprise Christmas present for my friend Benji, our friend Benji, my best friend. Pat looks at me a little funny. At this point in his life, Pat is only 15 years old. He's a freshman in high school, but he is already cooler than I will ever be in my entire life. And I have learned that when Pat looks at me like this, I need to pay attention. Pat tells me, guys don't buy Christmas presents for other guys. Pat tells me, guys especially don't buy surprise Christmas presents for other guys. Pat tells me he has had multiple girlfriends at a time over the long course of time, and he has never bought any of them a damn thing. So the fact that I have gone out 2 days before Christmas to buy Benji a surprise Christmas present is weird. I'm now feeling very self-conscious about the betta fish in the backseat of my car, the surprise Christmas present I bought for Pat an hour ago at the pet store, and the comic books I bought for Coog, and the sweatshirt I bought for Lisa, and all the other presents, surprise Christmas presents that I've gone out and bought for my friends. And I know Pat's right. It's weird for a 17-year-old kid to go out and buy surprise Christmas presents for all of his friends. But it's been a long time since I've had a good Christmas, and I have decided that this Christmas I am going to make into the Christmas I've always wanted. It's a different time in my life. I'm 17 years old, but I'm also a manager working at McDonald's full-time while going to high school. I make $6.25 an hour, and I am the richest person that I know. And I have decided that all autumn long, I have been saving my money to buy these presents, to buy myself the Christmas I've always wanted. A combination of my parents' failing marriage and a lifetime of poverty have made the last few holiday seasons, honestly, ones I wish had never happened before. But now I have money in my pocket. And with that money, I've gone out and bought presents. And it's going to be the right Christmas, damn it. But I need to get home. I'm in a rush. I need to get the betta fish out of the cold. And I also have a shift at McDonald's in a little while, and I need to go home and get my uniform so I can get back to work. I had never been shopping in my life before. I've never really had money before. I had no idea how long it can take and how tedious it can be. I throw all the presents into my mother's 1976 Datsun B210. It is a car about the size of a box of Pop Tarts, and it is filled to the roof with presents, and it makes me feel so good to see it again. And I start heading home. I'm driving through the town of Mendon, Massachusetts. It's this little country town, a couple towns over from my own. And as I'm driving, it starts to snow. It's the first snowfall of the year. And as the snow lands on the ground, it starts to turn the lawns white. And as I drive by each house, they're all decorated for Christmas. And now with the white lawns and the Christmas lights, it's like I'm driving by picture postcards of Christmas. And I start to really believe that this is the Christmas I've always wanted. I come up a hill, and as I come down the backside of that hill, my car starts to slide in the snow and the ice in the road. It starts to slide into the opposite lane. I look up and I see a white Mercedes Benz coming right at me. They say that in moments like this, time will slow down or even stop, and it's absolutely true. In the moments it takes for our two cars to collide head on, I have exactly three thoughts. The first is, I'm not wearing my seatbelt, and I always wear my seatbelt. But in the rush to get home, to get my McDonald's uniform and the excitement over Christmas shopping, I have forgotten to put my uniform on the worst day of my life to forget. The second thought I have is, I've always been told in situations like this to steer into the skid. It occurs to me in this moment, I don't know what the hell that means. To this day, I don't know what that means. And the third thought I have is just one sentence. It's 5 words long, and I speak it out loud. I say, this is going to suck. And it does. When we collide, I'm thrown forward. My chin catches the steering wheel, and it knocks the entire bottom row of my teeth out in one chunk and sends them to the back of my mouth. But I continue forward, and I go through the windshield, forehead first. But I'm not fully ejected from the car because at the same time, my legs surge forward. My right knee becomes embedded in the air conditioning unit right down to the bone. And my left knee hits the emergency brake release. It pops off that plastic handle, but the post skewers right through my knee. And then my chest surges forward and hits the steering wheel, breaks ribs, and knocks all the air out of my lungs. It happens in a second. And then shock, blessed shock, descends upon me. And truly, I feel no pain and I have no fear. I managed to pull my forehead, my head, out of the windshield. And I pull my legs out of the dashboard. I actually managed to get myself out of the car. I'm sort of standing beside the car, holding onto the door, crumpled over, when I see the woman from the Mercedes-Benz walking towards me. The size of her car and her seatbelt have left her completely protected, but she sees me, vomits, and passes out on the side of the road. The next person to arrive, it's a pickup truck full of kids. All the kids are piled in the back of the truck, and they're jumping out even before it has time to come to a stop. And the first kid to get to me is a kid just about my age. He grabs me by my jean jacket, and he lays me down in the snow and mud by the side of the road. He looks me over, and then he gets really close to my ear, and he whispers to me. He says, "Dude, you're fucked." It is the most accurate medical assessment that I'm going to receive that day. The next person to arrive is a police officer. He finds me on the side of the road. He takes off his coat and he lays it on top of me to keep me warm. He doesn't know that my ribs are broken and I can barely breathe. It feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds on my chest. I'm looking up at a white sky, and the snow is really starting to fall now, so I close my eyes. When I open my eyes again, I'm in the back of an ambulance. There's a young woman straddling my waist, and she's pounding on my chest, which is on fire now. And there's a man behind me shoving a clear plastic tube down my throat, making me cough. And the woman starts screaming, "He's back, he's back." And I'm wondering, who is back, and where did he go, and where am I? And I'll find out much, much later that I'm back. That for about a minute, my heart stopped beating, and I stopped breathing. But now I'm back. And now I'm in the emergency room, surrounded by doctors and nurses frantically working on me. There's nurses with tweezers pulling hundreds of pieces of glass out of my forehead. And dental surgeons come in and they grab that chunk of teeth that have been floating in my mouth the entire time and they wire them down into my jaw. It's the most painful thing that has ever happened to me. And there's doctors working on my knees, prepping me for surgery. But I hear a nurse say that it's December 23rd and surgeons are hard to come by. A nurse comes over with a clipboard and she asks me who I am because they cut all of my clothes off at the accident scene. And in the process, they lost my wallet. So I don't even know my name. So I tell her my name and my phone number. And then I give her the phone number for McDonald's. I tell her I need to be at work soon. She needs to call and tell them I'm not going to make it. She looks at me like I'm crazy. And I kind of am. A little while ago, I died in the back of an ambulance. And now I'm worried about McDonald's. But the drive-through doesn't run well when I'm not there, and Linda Diaz is going to need some help. We go back and forth about this. I actually get a little angry, and finally she agrees to call. And so I'm lying in the emergency room, surrounded by doctors and nurses who are trying to keep me alive, but who don't even know my name. And as they're working on me, I can see their faces begin to shift, especially the nurses. I know what they're thinking because now I'm thinking the same thing. Where the hell is this kid's parents? I'll find out later that when that nurse calls my home, my stepfather answers. And when he finds out that I'm in stable condition, they go to check on the car before they come to check on me. So I won't see my parents before I'm rolled into surgery that day. And so I'm lying in the emergency room feeling as alone as I've ever felt in my life. Except it turns out I'm not alone because that nurse calls McDonald's. And the manager on duty tells my friends what has happened. And an old-fashioned phone tree begins with friends calling friends calling friends. And now they're coming to the hospital. They're in the waiting room just outside the emergency room, and I know it because they're teenagers and they're loud. 15 and 16 and 17-year-old kids in ripped jeans and concert t-shirts. And a 15-year-old boy who's cooler than all of them. And the first person to arrive that day is my best friend, Benji. And when the nurses realize that my parents aren't going to make it before I'm rolled into surgery, they roll me to the other side of the emergency room. They prop open these double doors. And they let my friends stand in the doorway. And the boys say incredibly inappropriate things to make me laugh. And the girls tell me they love me. And I can hear them chanting my name as I'm rolled into surgery that day. None of the gifts that I buy for my friends ever make it into their hands. Everything is lost in the accident. And the only casualty of the day is the betta fish. It does not survive. But it turns out that Pat was wrong that day on that sidewalk when he told me that friends don't get friends surprise Christmas presents. Because my friends gave me that day the best gift I've been given in my life. They give me the gift of family. And until I meet my wife 15 years later, they're the only family I have and the only family that I need. Thank you. Okay. It's ridiculous. I've told that story hundreds of times and I still get emotional. It's ridiculous. I tell that story for a bunch of reasons, all of which I can't tell you right now for the sake of time. But here's the important thing I want you to take away from it. That's one of my big stories. I die in that story and come back to life. But think about it for a minute. Is it actually a story about me dying and coming back to life? I'll tell you it's not. It's not at all, right? That is a story about a boy who thought, right, who thought he could get the perfect Christmas by buying presents for his friends. And in the end, his friends gave him the best Christmas present he's ever been given. Family. That's what that story is about. It's about feeling like you're alone and then realizing you're not alone. That's it. If I try to tell you a story about going through a windshield and getting your legs ruined in a dashboard, you'll not connect with me. If I make it about me dying, none of you will sit there and think, yeah, Matt, I remember when I died. It was terrible, right? We can't connect on a dying and coming back to life level, but we can connect on the idea that loneliness sucks. We can connect on the idea that sometimes our friends pick us up when we're in need the most. We can connect on the idea that sometimes our parents let us down terribly. Those are things that people understand. They understand loneliness and friendship. They understand being let down and picked up. In fact, if I was to tell that story in front of you, maybe you became emotional. I can't confirm it because I can't see you. I became emotional. When I'm in an audience, people become emotional all the time. But no one becomes emotional when I die in that story. They just blink at me. I die in the story and nobody cares, emotionally at least. They always cry when my friends show up in the emergency room because you cannot connect to dying and coming back to life. In fact, if we acknowledge that stories are about transformation, or a realization, I could never tell that story about dying and coming back to life because I didn't know what was happening. In my mind, I closed my eyes, and then there was a woman on me pounding on my chest, and I opened my eyes. I never even knew what happened. It wasn't until 3 days later when a nurse told me in my hospital room, she said, "You should stop complaining. You know, you were dead in the back of that ambulance." And I said, "What?" And she said, "You were dead in that ambulance for like a minute." And I said, "What?" I didn't know it for 3 days. So how could I tell a story about a moment that I didn't even know happened, right? That's a moment about friendship. The trick is you have your big stories, these big moments. They can't be about the big thing. They have to be about something small, something relatable, something connectable. All of my big stories are like that. The story of me getting arrested is really my story about my struggle for faith, which is something I think lots of people understand. The other time I died and came back to life, I got stung by a bee the first time and didn't know I was allergic. But it's really a story about me desperately trying to remain connected to my mother, both in childhood and later on when she dies. Because we all understand trying to stay connected to our parents or our loved ones when they pass. Big stories have to be about small things, not about big things. But so many people think, I'm going to tell the big story. I'm going to tell the story about the time I died and came back to life, and everyone's going to want to listen for that reason. Nope. That's not why people listen. They listen because you touch their heart, you touch their mind, you ring a bell in their head. They think, I know what that is. I feel that. I've gone through something like that. That's why they love your stories. That's why they're going to love your stories. So do all the things I told you. Homework for Life is the most important thing. If you're interested in hearing more about Homework for Life, there's a TED talk on it. If you just Google the phrase Homework for Life, you'll find it and you can hear more about it. You can buy my book and read chapter 3 about it. You can actually see a sample of my Homework for Life. I have a podcast. It's called Speak Up Storytelling. I do it with my wife. You can find it wherever you get podcasts. Speak Up Storytelling. Every week we play a story and we analyze it. And every week I give you a Homework for Life moment from my own Homework for Life, a moment that happened over the course of the week and how it might someday become a story. Do Homework for Life. It's the most important thing. Play 3, 2, 1 with a friend tonight, or by yourself if you're all alone, or with a family member, whoever. Play it. Play it often. Play it all the time. The next time you're in a terrible meeting, play 3, 2, 1. Perchance.org/object. Pull it up and play it in your head by yourself. If you find a new story, add it to your list. And then use my 3 big tricks. Okay? Know what a story is. It's about a moment of realization or transformation. Create a frame for your story by finding a beginning and an end that are in the opposites of each other, and then tell your stories in scenes by providing physical locations for your audience at all times so they can see it in their minds. So you can make movies in the heads of human beings. That's the goal. If you want anything else, go to MatthewDix.com. You can take a workshop. You can find my books. You can find my podcast. You can find lots and lots of storytelling content there. Or just reach out to me, MatthewDix@gmail.com. Send me an email if you have a question. If there are any questions that Denise has right now, I'd be happy to stay on. But if we don't, we'll wrap this up. Denise, I'm not sure where we stand.
Actually, we had a couple of things, and somebody said they were in tears during the car crash story,
Well,
and they thank you for being vulnerable. Tiff just put that up. Another one was
thanks,
thank you.
Bethany.
Yeah, and stumbled on this broadcast and ended up watching the entire time. Well, time well spent. Thank you.
I'm
I'm
really
glad you
glad,
found us,
Lori.
Lori.
That's
Glad you
great.
found us.
I'm
That's
so
awesome.
glad.
Lots of thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
So
That's
I
really nice.
think, yeah, we're kind of at the end of thing. Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much. I mean, I've heard one of the stories before, and every time it gets me, and I just like listening to you tell stories. I have to admit.
Thank you.
Um, I thank the audience for joining us. I know it was hard. It's a beautiful day outside today. Um,
My kids
our,
are right outside this window right now staring at me
yeah,
like,
there's this,
come play with us.
kids behind me that they're having a great party behind me.
Mhm.
Um, our next storytelling event is on June 20th at 7 p.m. It's called Dinner Stories with Jennifer Monroe, Doug Coffin, Mike
Oh.
Isco, and the musician is Adam Matlock. I hope
I
you will join us.
I know all 3 of those people. I don't know the
Yeah,
musician, but I've told stories with Jennifer. She's amazing.
she is
Is that
amazing.
Doug Kaufman from Yukon?
Uh, now, Doug Coffin is the big green pizza truck guy.
Oh, I know
So,
Doug Kaufman from Yukon, and then Mike
okay.
Isco I know very well. He's actually gone through my workshops before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike's great. And then
Mhm.
Adam Matlock is our musician, and he's really he's cool. Very, very cool.
Yeah.
So lots of thank yous, and everybody had a great time, it looks like. So thank you for joining us. I really am happy that we were able to have time with you today.
Thank you. Thanks. It was my pleasure. Thanks everyone for listening. Go tell some stories and best of luck to all of you.
Good afternoon.